Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This webinar will discuss renewables working together, renewable energy systems and synergies. I hope you find the webinar interesting and that you learn some new aspects about the work being carried out in the fields of solar, wind, geothermal, bioenergy and hydropower that you may not have known before this webinar. In particular, this webinar will focus on how different renewable energy technologies can work together to provide reliable energy systems. Before we begin with the webinar presentations, I would like to inform you about what ISIS is and stands for. The International Solar Energy Society is a non-profit UN-accredited membership NGO. The ISIS vision is to achieve 100% renewable energy for all, used efficiently and wisely. We represent a diverse membership of academics, researchers, energy practitioners, consultants, students, businesses and advocates. ISIS works together with like-minded organizations from countries around the world to advance the renewable energy transformation. We have many ISIS members participating in this webinar, and also many of you are new to ISIS, and this might be your first ISIS webinar. The presentations being held in this webinar are already posted on the ISIS website, so you can have a look at them there. And the webinar recording will be posted online after the webinar and left online for about 24 hours to be publicly available. After that time, we will post the recording and the presentations into the ISIS members area. So if you are an ISIS member, simply log into your account and click on members area in the top level menu, and you will already see the library of webinars. If you are not a member, please visit our membership page and we encourage you to sign up. That's on join.isis.org. You are welcome and encouraged to ask questions at any time throughout the webinar. To ask a question, select the questions pane on your screen and type in your question. Please specify who your question is directed to. I will then assign the question to the speaker. Questions will be addressed after all the presentations in a short Q&A session, depending on how much time we have. We try to answer as many questions as possible during the webinar, but we do apologize if we do not get to your question, and we will collect the questions and get as many answers to them as possible and post them into the ISIS members area along with the recording after the webinar. Let me continue on to introduce the expert panelist speakers. The speakers are from the International Renewable Energy Alliance, also known as the REN Alliance. The REN Alliance is an alliance of the following partners: the International Solar Energy Society, the International Geothermal Association, the World Wind Energy Association, the World Bioenergy Association, and the International Hydropower Association. The REN Alliance was formed in 2004 and has been established to advance policy and information on renewable energy by providing a combined voice for renewable energy technology and practice. The REN Alliance bridges the gap between policy and practice by building on the synergy of its partner organizations to achieve progress through their collective experience and knowledge. During the COP21 in Paris on the 7th of December 2015, the REN Alliance partners will hold a side event discussing the concept of a 100% renewable energy future, presenting case studies on where this vision is already in practice and setting a powerful example for the rest of the world. Case studies will address integration of variable renewable energies, policies and financing. So if you are attending the COP21 in Paris this December, we welcome you to participate in this important event. Our first speaker for today is Dr. David Rene, President of the International Solar Energy Society since 2010. Dr. Rene is also the Associate Editor of the Solar Energy Journal in the field of solar resource assessment. He's also the operating agent of the International Energy Agency Solar Heating and Cooling Programme Task 46, titled Solar Resource Assessment and Forecasting. Welcome to the webinar, Dr. David Renee, and you may start your presentation.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Can you see my screen? Let me just confirm that my screen is
Yes, we can.
showing. Okay, well, thank you for the introduction and welcome everybody to our webinar. Where our topic today is renewables working together, systems and synergies. And I'm going to give a few opening comments. As Joanna mentioned, the upcoming climate conference in Paris in December represents a very important milestone for climate change mitigation, and the REN Alliance believes strongly in the concept of 100% renewable energy as being the way to mitigate future climate change and to attain the 2 degrees centigrade target that we're trying to achieve by the end of this century. So I just wanted to give some background on this. First of all, let me just say that when we talk about 100% renewable energy, we really need to think about final energy production and consumption. This is a figure that comes out of the global status report, the REN 21 global status report from 2014, showing the current state of final energy production and how much of that is broken down by fossil fuels versus other technologies, especially renewables. And you can see that by the end of 2012, roughly 19% of our final energy production was associated with renewable energy production, primarily traditional biomass, and also a large component of that is hydropower with some wind and solar. So for 100% renewables, we have to be thinking about end-use consumption by all sectors. And as we can see here from these figures I'm pointing up, that means we have to consider all of the major energy sector users, such as buildings, which is about 35% of our final energy consumption, transport, which is about 30% of our final energy consumption, industry is 31%, and other consumers which includes energy losses, are roughly 4%. Now, in terms of electricity, the global share of electricity production is shown in this figure. This is this is a slightly more recent set of numbers. You can see here that nearly 23% of our total electricity production is by renewable electricity. Again, a large portion of that is associated, excuse me, with hydropower. And also I should point out here that between 2013 and 2014, the renewable energy share only increased by less than 1%. So this represents not only some good news in that renewable energy electricity is over 20%, but also the challenges that we're facing in terms of getting that number from 20% to 100% renewables. And so here's a brief overview of why that's such an important challenge for us. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, came up with some representative concentration pathway scenarios. These are scenarios based on carbon dioxide emissions or greenhouse gas emissions, as well as atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases. And they looked at several different scenarios. The blue one, the 8.5, is more or less a business as usual scenario. In other words, if we don't take strong action, that would be the that would represent the concentration of atmospheric carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas emissions by the end of this century, and which would be quite a high number. And then there's various other scenarios based on developmental and policy assumptions that get us to much better and much lower numbers. And the point I want to make here is that the green line, the representative concentration scenario that is called 2.6, and that relates to the concentration of carbon in the atmosphere, is the one that is our best opportunity to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees centigrade by the end of this century. And as you can see on the figure on the left, this means that the emissions of greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide have to start decreasing within the next decade or so. This is going to require a fairly aggressive set of decisions that have to be made by national governments in order to start getting carbon dioxide emissions to begin to go down. And unfortunately right now they're still going up on an annual basis by quite a large amount. Even if we start decreasing carbon dioxide emissions within the next decade, they're still going to continue to, the concentration will continue to increase in the atmosphere until about the middle of the century and not start dropping until after the mid-century. But if we follow that 2.6 scenario, that will get us to limit our greenhouse gas warming at 2 degrees centigrade by the end of this century, according to the best scientific predictions we can have. Here's another way to look at this. This is where the various scenarios will take us by the end of this century. And as you can see right now, we are nearly 1 degree centigrade warming above pre-industrial levels. And the RCP 2.6, which is the dark line here, will cap out at roughly 2 degrees centigrade warming. It's a dark blue line by the end of this century. And so we have quite a challenge. Again, this emphasizes a challenge facing us in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions to keep within 2 degrees centigrade by the end of this century. And the REN Alliance believes strongly that our renewable energy technologies working together will be the most promising opportunity to ensure that we achieve this mitigation target. This is just a summary of scenarios that have already been looked at. This is produced by the REN 21 group a couple of years ago in a report called the Global Futures Report, which was led by Dr. Eric Martineau, and he looked at several studies that had already been accomplished to see how we can achieve conservative, moderate, and high renewable energy scenarios by the year 2050. And as you can see, the most optimistic study was done by Greenpeace. They've recently come up with a revised version of that report. This is just to get to 2050. This doesn't show the end of the decade, but it does show that Greenpeace had some very good studies that can get us to near 100% clean energy or renewable energy by the middle of the century. The Global Energy Assessment from EASA also showed very promising pathways to get to high penetration renewables, especially by taking some very strong efficiency measures. You can see other studies here. The International Energy Agency has done a couple. Even ExxonMobil has done studies to show that, but their studies are far less optimistic than the Greenpeace and Global Energy Assessment studies. So what are the ingredients for a successful 100% pathway? Well, first, I think that's a three-legged stool. Here's the best way to describe it. First of all, you need cost-effective and efficient technologies that can work together. Of course, all of these technologies for effective deployment need access to capital, and especially private capital. We can't expect governments to pay for all this. This has to be done in the capital markets. And we definitely, however, the governments can play a very strong role in providing favorable and reliable policies and targets at the national and regional levels. And of course, on top of all this is the public acceptance of the notion of having our energy supply being provided completely by renewable energy by the end of this century. Now, I'll just talk briefly about solar, since that's the area that I've been working in. The growth of solar PV over the last 20 years has been quite remarkable. If you put it in terms of a learning curve, it shows that for every doubling of the capacity, or for the increase of capacity is roughly is providing a 22% learning curve. In other words, every year the prices drop by 20% as we double the capacity of photovoltaics. And you see two lines here. One is for crystalline silicon, which is a primary technology, and then the CAD telluride. And part of this learning curve is due to the R&D that have been provided by governments and the private industry over the years that continue to show strong cell efficiency improvements. This is a set of curves put together by INRO to show all the different technologies and how the efficiency of the technology is improving on an annual basis. and the U.S. has a goal of 50 cents per watt as a target for the cost of a panel, and $1 a watt for the cost of a system. And we're actually getting quite close to that. And I should point out here that around the world, in many places around the world now, solar can become the least cost option for providing energy access, particularly in areas where there is no current access to reliable energy resources. Now, the growth of solar is going to require utility flexibility. This curve on the left is known as the duck curve. It was produced by the California Independent System Operators, but it basically exemplifies, and here is specifically case for solar, which is one of the variable renewable energies that we have to deal with. Wind is another variable renewable energy. We're going to hear more about that in a moment. But just looking at solar here, we can see that as solar penetrations increase, what utilities are going to experience is a net load that gets lower and lower. In other words, solar coming online, as long as it's handled by the utility effectively, will continue to reduce the net load, because during the daytime, the loads may not be very high anyway. As the loads peak in the evening when people go home after work and start cooking and doing their evening activities. So what that means is that as high penetrations of solar occur in a grid, that's great during the middle of the day. Net loads are quite low, but as the evening comes along, as the solar resource decreases and the loads increase, it's a significant ramp that occurs. And this just means basically that utilities must be flexible in addressing that ramp. So you'll hear a lot about utility flexibility as a key step toward 100% renewables. So what are some high penetration solutions in order to achieve such high amounts of variable renewable energy in the grid? Well, of course, the way we manage a load is going to be very important. So demand side management will still be a critical factor for the electricity system to be addressing as we go forward with more and more variable renewable energy into the grid. Storage is also going to be a critical issue, and it's also going to require a lot of R&D tech development in order to bring the cost down. We've seen significant progress over the last 5 to 10 years in this area. A lot of work still needs to be done. And then resource synergies, especially synergies between wind resources and solar resources, are very favorable in many places around the world, where as the wind resource, as solar resource decrease, we seem to have a concurrent increase in wind resources. So that's a very important factor to be taken care of. And that sort of provides a segue to our next speaker, Stefan Zanger, who will, and following Stefan will be other speakers talking about some case studies of how renewables can work together. So that represents the end of my talk. Joanna, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. And just to let the audience know as well that your presentation is available on the ISIS website, so that if you're interested in looking at the graphs shown in the presentation, you can have a look at the ISIS website and see them in more detail there. Great, so moving on to our next speaker, Stefan Zanger, who has managed the World Wind Energy Association since its foundation in 2001. Under his direction, the WWEA has become the voice of the wind sector worldwide, with members in more than 100 countries. Stefan, we can see your screen. Could you please unmute your microphone?
Yes, thank you very much, Joanna. Also, thank you, David. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, I think thank you for organizing this webinar. It's a very good opportunity for all of us, indeed, to introduce a little bit not only our own technologies, but also especially the synergies of different technologies. I have decided to talk a little bit about the rural electrification sector, with showing you some cases from Western African countries. Before that, no, I should. Okay. Now you can see the second slide here. Seems
yep.
so, huh?
Yes.
So before that, giving you a brief introduction of where wind power stands at the moment globally. These are the figures middle of the year, June 2015. So we have a new record in new installations in the first half of 2015. We have now globally 393 almost gigawatt of installations. This is now more than nuclear power for sure. Nuclear power, the figures are not so clear because it depends on how you count, but now wind energy is now larger than nuclear power. China has an amazing growth, and another country which has very strong growth now is Brazil, coming out of nothing and is now already number 10. This is of course the grid-connected wind turbines. They altogether generate potentially, if you take what is installed now, 800 terawatt hours. In comparison, Germany has a consumption of around 500 terawatt hours, so it is substantial. It's around 4% of the global electricity demand, and you have some countries like Denmark with 40 almost, or more than 40% now probably, Spain, Portugal, Uruguay around 20%, Germany around 10% now. All of these countries still increasing their shares. Now we come to the small wind turbines, and we are also gathering statistics about that. It is a little bit challenging to find the statistics, but I think we can give you at least an indication of where the markets are. We have globally something like close to 1 million units of small wind turbines. Small wind turbine following the definition of up to 100 kilowatt. Most of them are in China, almost 2/3, followed by the United States and the United Kingdom. These are the three really big markets for small wind, but China has an exceptional role here. In China, most of these wind turbines are indeed used for rural electrification, especially in areas where there is no grid yet. And in China, they still have some areas like this. They use the wind turbines also sometimes by people who are like herdsmen who are traveling around, and they can take the small wind turbines with them, and they always have power. There are not so many of the so-called developing countries who have already a large amount of these small wind turbines installed, but there's certainly a very large potential. Now, coming to two African countries where we are currently doing, or we have done, a market study of rural electrification based on renewable energy. One is Mali, the other one is Senegal, and we have partners in these countries, members in these countries. It is interesting to see at first that the rate of electrification in the year 1999 was very low, in Mali 1%, and now it's already 17%. And the good news there is most of this additional electrification is based on renewable energy. In Senegal, it increased from 7 to 32%. And of course, this is still very low, and we wonder how a grid could be extended, how that could be based, of course, on conventional fossil resources. That would probably not be possible. So it makes a lot of sense to do the new investment based on renewable energy. Of course, the challenge we have, like with all the renewables which don't need fuel, is that you have a quite high upfront investment, and then, of course, almost zero, or very close to zero operation cost. So what you need to do is to overcome this initial barrier and initiate a kind of positive circle. It means that start what you can see here with the energy supply, which enables the people to consume the energy in a commercial way, which then can lead to economic activities, which changes enterprises and creates new jobs. So there is a possibility of using the power in a very simple way, using light in the evening after sunset, so that people can continue working, or they can buy a fridge, or they can buy some machines and use them, which of course then will lead to generation of income, and then there is less poverty, and people can again invest the generated value or part of that additional income they have into energy supply, so that it can be, as I said, a positive spiral. The big challenge is in really countries where there is still a lot of poverty, is how to overcome the very first step of starting investing in the first equipment. So we have, as I said, we had a look renewable energy policies and the market in Mali and Senegal. Actually, what we've done is we interviewed investors in both countries who are actually investing in rural electrification systems, which are based on wind and solar. Both countries do have different renewable energy policies in place, including, for example, grants if you invest in such renewable energy installations. And then I give you here an example in Senegal. There is one place, this Sine Moussa, where there's been installed wind-solar hybrid systems, including batteries, and also for backup, they still use the diesel generator. This village has a population of 900 people, and now this works very well. After a couple of years of construction, the people are having access to energy. And by the way, in most of these cases where people use still to have a diesel generator, this diesel generator is hardly used, if at all. So in total, there is a project, and the village I just mentioned, this is just one out of 30 villages. 30 villages have been electrified with providing electricity now to 30,000 citizens. All of this based on wind solar hybrid systems. We have another example. This is one here from Mali. This only uses solar batteries and diesel generator for backup. That's quite new. That's been installed in this year. With also some international donations. It has a diesel backup, but I've been told that that so far has not been used, the diesel backup. So the battery is good enough for 3 days backup. So far, just the solar panel and the stored electricity are enough to provide the power for these people. Our member, the Mali Focus Center, and by the way, I just returned from Jerusalem where we had our World Wind Energy conference, and we gave the World Wind Energy Award to the Mali Focus Center for their rural electrification activities. So the Mali Focus Center is an NGO, a non-profit NGO, and they have done these 9 projects so far where they electrified villages. In total, more than 40,000 people have been electrified, and you can see here all the projects which have now access to power which they did not have before. We asked the investors, I mentioned that what we've done is getting in contact with the companies. It is mainly companies, small, medium-sized companies investing in these countries. Ask them, what are the barriers that you see? And then what we got as an answer was there are 4 categories, I'd say. Financial policy barriers, which have been identified as the biggest problems, finance from national banks, because they usually don't know also how finance works of such a technology which is new for them, and then supporting policies in general. This is also a big problem. Knowledge has been also identified as a gap. So if we think about how we can support such areas, such countries, then yeah, we have to see where to get the initial finance from, how to make the governments understand which policies are necessary, and then which kind of capacity building activities could be launched to support the people that they know how to install, which equipment is available, operation and maintenance, all these things. We asked then also the investors about the positive effects of the access of power, and you can see here the lowest are the most kind of positive effects. These investors have told us especially a positive effect is of now available power, increase of existing economic activity, which is in addition, it's even a little bit higher than new economic activities. Gives us also an indication that obviously at places where there is already some income, this initial barrier to overcome, where to get the initial investment from, is a little bit less difficult than when we come to a place where there is practically no commercial activity yet. But you see there are many positive effects which have been mentioned: education, access to water, which is seen as very, very important in many places, even rated more important than access to electricity. But that can be made accessible by having electricity. It's easier to get access to water, of course. Public health, public security, also employment, especially youth unemployment. These are all positive impacts of rural electrification. I'm sorry. As a kind of summary, I think it is very interesting to see that 50% of the respondents of these investors have told us that their projects have generated profit without any international grants donations, which is interesting and good to see, because obviously there are places where it's just about the business model. So we have to inform people about which technologies do we have and which business model can be used. Of course, the other 50%, we also have to take care of them and make sure these are obviously the poorer areas, that they also have an opportunity to get out of poverty or to kind of start this positive circle. 91% of the investors have told us that they think it was worthwhile to pursue the project. That's very encouraging, of course. So there is a very big market, and what we're trying to do is to especially encourage the local investors so that we have more added value, not only by international investors, but especially by local investors if they can do it. We have proposed a program. It's also related to, of course, feed-in tariff, but would relate to grid-connected wind turbines. But I think it can be also applied to off-grid installations because, as I said, the initial investment is a big problem. So what we have proposed is that and that is related to the COP in Paris, that the Green Climate Fund, which is now supposed to have 10 billion, one day $100 billion, should give mainly guarantees for investors to overcome the initial hurdle. I was told that in a country like Mali, interest rates for capital that you lend is like 15–20%. This is, of course, has a tremendous impact on the cost of the project. The capital costs are decisive. If we can bring that down by international guarantees, loan guarantees, which obviously reduce the risk, that already can make many more projects bankable. And of course, in the cases of the poorest communities, there should be, in addition to the guarantees, also grants, which should, by the national government, then be distributed to the company or the community that is operating the facility. Yeah, with this, at the end of my presentation, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan. There's been a lot of interesting questions coming in for you, but I'm going to save them to the end for our Q&A session. So please continue sending in questions for Stefan and for David and for all the other panelists, please, and we will try to get them in the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Right, now I'm going to introduce our third speaker, Marietta Sander, the Executive Director of the International Geothermal Association, IGA. In her function at the IGA, she manages the IGA headquarters, provides technical expertise on geothermal energy and networking opportunities to practitioners, international organizations, and civil society. So welcome, Marietta.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Yes, this is Marietta Sander from the International Geothermal Association. I would start my presentation with giving you a very brief background on the International Geothermal Association, and thereafter I would like to give you a brief introduction also into geothermal and its different uses, and then go into the heart of this presentation, which includes case studies and which really reflect the synergies of renewable energy technologies working together. I will bring to you 4 different case studies from different parts of this world, and I hope that this will encourage some of you to look into these synergy uses of different renewables. So starting with the International Geothermal Association, we have about 5,000 members on a global scale. We closely work together with 35 national geothermal associations, and members of these national as well as our IGA members organizations include geothermal experts and people working in the private sector, researchers. Our members include also government representatives as well as civil society. On this first slide, you already see some of the uses of geothermal energy. On the left-hand side, you see that geothermal can be used for biological uses. Some of you might have been to Iceland or to other countries and might have been swimming in geothermal waters, which are quite nice and warm. I have been swimming in hot springs. And then the 2 center photos show actually a mine water use, where geothermal waters are used from a mine project, from former mining project in Germany. And this mine water is actually pumped to the surface and it's heating buildings. It's actually located in the city where the IGA headquarters are in Bochum, Germany. And the mine water is used to heat a fire station and a school building. On the right-hand side, you see a hot spring, which was photographed in Uganda. At this stage, I would also like to acknowledge the European Union and the Federal State of North Rhine-Westphalia, who are supporting the IGA headquarters over here in Germany. Now I would like to start giving you a brief background on geothermal energy and its uses. This slide shows you the so-called Lindell diagram, and it shows you the different uses of geothermal energy. On the left-hand side, on the arrow, you see the different temperature ranges in which geothermal can be used, and you see different uses starting at the lower temperatures of aquaculture, of drying, agricultural drying processes, uses like soil warming in greenhouses, or it can be used for heat pumps. And heating and cooling is actually one very important component, especially for the northern countries, like for example Denmark, or Sweden, France, Germany, Turkey. For all these countries, geothermal heat is actually very important. And then with the temperatures increasing, you can also generate electricity from geothermal energy, starting with binary geothermal power plants and then going to another technology to flash and dry steam geothermal power plants. So on this slide, you basically see that geothermal can be used for a variety of purposes, and not only for power production or not only for heat provision, but also for many other agricultural purposes. This slide also belongs to the introductory part of my presentation. I would like to introduce you to the global geothermal markets. And on the figure, you can actually see that the red indicates the high potential markets for geothermal, where geothermal is used substantially. The top 5 geothermal power producers are actually the USA, the Philippines, Indonesia, Mexico, and New Zealand. The figures for Kenya are already outdated. Some of you might have heard that Kenya is one of the coming power producers, and at the current stage, I think it's been increased to over 620 megawatts already. New markets will start developing in Latin America, especially also in South America. And the first geothermal power plant in South America is currently being developed at the Cerro Pabellon in Chile. So even though at the moment the South American continent still looks very empty, the geothermal users are starting over there as well. Speaking about direct use opportunities, these exist. As I showed you the diagram with the different geothermal uses before, and the top geothermal direct use countries include the US, China, Sweden, Germany, France, Denmark. And just to give you a summary of the global installed power capacity, it's about 12.6 gigawatt, and geothermal power is produced in 24 countries, whereas direct use applications are used in over 82 countries worldwide. Now I'd like to introduce you to some of the case studies which I indicated earlier, where I will show you that geothermal can work together with other renewable energy technologies. I brought you 4 case studies from different countries in the world, and I would like to start with the hybrid biomass geothermal Honey Lake power plant, which is located in the US. It's a 30 megawatt plant which was built in 1989, and its main resource is actually wood chip waste. You can see a photograph of the Honey Lake power plant on the bottom of the slide. And in this power plant, geothermal is actually used to preheat the boiler condensate water and to dry the wood chips, which come in with a high moisture content. So the geothermal fluids actually dry the wood chips which come in. For this, a well was drilled down to 1,600 meters of depth, and where 118 degrees Celsius were reached. So one of the results is that the fuel consumption is reduced and the fuel saving of about 19% occurs at this power plant. Now coming to the next example, I would like to take you to Nevada in the US, and I would like to show you the solar PV and geothermal power plant in Stillwater. It's basically a solar PV installation which works together with a 33 megawatt binary power plant. You can see some of the pictures on the slide on the left hand side. The left photograph shows the PV installation. Up to now it's already finished. That was one of the first photographs. It was inaugurated in 2009, and up to now it's providing power to 45,000 local homes. And at the time of its installation, the installers could actually use $40 million, which were provided by the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. The facility uses a medium enthalpy binary system because the temperature is just moderate, and it uses two fluids, hot water from the underground, which heats the isobutane, and thereafter causes it to flash into vapor. The photograph shows you the installation. And now I would like to take you to the next case study, which is actually the Sonderburg municipality in Denmark. The Sonderburg municipality just received an award from the EU, Sustainable Award, and I'd like to explain it to you because the municipality started the Project Zero initiative. Project Zero is a public-private partnership which was created in 2007 by the Swedish utility company Danfoss, Bioenergy, the Sonderburg municipality, and the Nordea Bank Foundation. So these partners work together to create a joint public-private partnership which aims to drastically reduce the CO2 emissions. They actually want to convert themselves into a zero carbon community by 2029. At the moment, it's a very agricultural community which consists of 77,000 inhabitants and a number of pigs and hens. So agriculture is very important for this community. The sustainable of this initiative, the focus of this initiative is on sustainable growth, green jobs, green technologies, and to rethink really electricity and transport uses. On the right-hand side, you can see the district heating plant, the combined heat and power plant, and the geothermal well, which was drilled. And now I would like to take you to my final case study, which I brought along. It actually takes us to Canada, to the Drake Landing community in Canada, in Alberta. And on the figures on the right, you can see that a number of houses was, or that a number of solar installations were added to houses and to garages when the municipality was being constructed. And the solar energy is actually stored in the underground during the summer months, and the energy is then distributed to each home for space heating needs during the winter months. So here, in this context, geothermal, the geothermal underground is actually used to store the heat which is collected in the summer months. Altogether, 800 solar panels generate about 1.5 megawatt of thermal per summer day, and 52 houses are heated, or 52 houses are heated and provided with water, warm water altogether. For the installation, for the geothermal installation, 144 boreholes were drilled, and they each have a distance of 2.25 meters. And some of the heat is transferred into the soil and rock, and in some it actually approaches about 80 degrees Celsius, which is then stored in the subsurface. And with this, I would like to close my presentation, and we move on to the next speaker from the World Bioenergy Association. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marietta. Also, a lot of questions coming in for you, which we will address in the Q&A session. I'd like to now introduce our next speaker, Heinz Koppitz. He's the president of the World Bioenergy Association since 2012, and from 2005 and 2010 was also a chairman of the European Biomass Association in Brussels. So welcome, Heinz, and we have your presentation up on screen.
Hello, Joanna.
Hello.
Hello, Joanna. Good afternoon. Welcome to all of you. I would like to give a brief information about the role of biomass in the synergy and symphony of renewables. The next one. At the beginning, I would like to show you on this graph the present situation of our global energy system. We need not really oil or coal or biomass, but what we need is heat, transport fuels, and electricity for different purposes. And according to our view, mankind should try to reduce the use of fossil fuels by 50% within the next 20 years to comply with the climate mitigation targets. And you see here on this figure, at present, fossil fuels are dominating the energy system, followed by nuclear, and bioenergy plays quite a big role with about 10% of primary energy. And the specific point is that only 60% of the primary energy, 560 exajoule, comes to the consumer in form of final energy. There are huge losses in the system, and I would like to explain this going to the next picture. Concerning biomass, a brief word about our technology. Biomass originates from green plants coming from agriculture, forestry, or waste, and we can convert biomass with many different technologies to heat, electricity, and transport fuels. And you see here the composition of the final energy used worldwide. In the year 2012, fossil fuels are dominating, and in the last line you see, out of these 342 exajoule, almost half of this figure, 161 exajoule, is heat, followed by transport, and then by electricity. And also the fossil fuels are mainly used for heat, followed by transport, and the final energy from fossil fuels is 55 exajoule. One of the problems is that the input to produce, to generate this 55 exajoule electricity is about 200 exajoule primary energy. The composition of final energy, 63 exajoule, is heat, transport fuel, and electricity. Most of the heat comes from biomass, all of the transport fuel, and a small part of electricity. Concerning biomass, we distinguish between modern biomass and traditional biomass. The bigger share of this 45 exajoule heat is traditional biomass, mainly in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. This is wood fuel or charcoal for cooking, whereas these 3 exajoule transport fuels are modern biofuels for ethanol, in form of ethanol or from biodiesel. And now coming to main question on the next picture about the challenges we have in the future and what could be the contribution of biomass to a future energy system with less and less fossil fuels. As you see it, all renewables have to be integrated to cover the needs of the societies for heat, transport, and electricity. And we see the specific role of biomass in delivering heat, transport fuels, and cogeneration units to generate stable electricity and also heat. And this is one of the points where different technologies can really cooperate in a meaningful way, because, for instance, electricity from biogas can be produced in the evening or the night or in the morning, and the generator can shut down over the day if we have too much solar electricity. So we think this combination in the electricity production between solar, wind, and biogas, biomass offers the opportunity to come to stable electricity supplies only based on renewable energy. And we see the specific role of the other renewables, mainly in electricity and not so much in wind and in transport. I would like now to go on and to give you two examples of very dynamic developments of biomass. One is the field of biomass to liquid biofuels. You see here about 80% of transport fuels from biomass in 2012 have been produced in the Americas. This means in North America, mainly ethanol from corn, and in South America, mainly ethanol from sugarcane and biodiesel from soybeans. One point I would like to make here is if you take North America, ethanol from corn, using corn for ethanol production means that we simultaneously produce protein feed, because corn consists of starch and proteins, and if you have a strong biofuel production from corn, you also have a strong protein production, and therefore a developed biofuel production also helps to improve the supply of protein for the food situation. A specific situation we have in Brazil, because in Brazil they have a very flexible system, and many people are buying flex cars. These are cars they can run on ethanol 100% or on gasoline. And this offers the opportunity to use fuels that are cheap on the market at present. And in Brazil, now about 90% of the cars being sold are flex cars that can run on biofuels or on fossil fuels. And this shows in the future the development that this combination of more biofuels with fossil fuels needs also adjustments in the car fleet. Another very dynamic situation on the next picture is our pellets development. This here is a picture of the most dynamic pellet market in Europe. This is Italy. You see in 2012 in Italy they consumed more than 2 million tons of pellets. And over the last 10 years, they reached an annual growth rate of 29%. So they are buying every year 200 to 300,000 stoves, and mainly pellet stoves, only a few pellet boilers. And it shows that it's a combination of the government policy and new technology in pellet stove production offers the opportunity to replace step by step fossil fuels in the heating market with pellets. Italy is a specific example, but if you would look on the global market, we would see a similar growth. In the last year, globally, about 28 million tons of pellets have been produced, and we also see on the global scale that the pellet production is growing steadily by about 15% per year. After these two examples of dynamic developments, I would like to explain two countries in which the share of renewable energy is already very high, and where you can see how different renewable technologies are working together. I'm explaining Brazil and Sweden, one country from America, one from Europe. because these countries have a highly developed modern sector of bioenergy technologies. And as you can see here, in Brazil, 41% of the primary energy supply is already renewable, and in Sweden it's even 51% now. And both countries have very ambitious policies to go further and further, and in Sweden they are just discussing now how they can reach 100% renewables within the next decade in a very practical way. And you see here, in these two countries, we have a very important contribution of bioenergy. In Brazil it's 28%, in Sweden 34%. And if you would go more into the detail, you would see in Brazil, this bioenergy contribution is partly ethanol from sugarcane, but there's also a lot of biomass coming from wood and from residuals to be used as heat, even in the steel industry. For instance, Brazil is a specific country with a highly developed charcoal production, and they use partly charcoal in the steel industry instead of coal. And in both countries there is also certainly a strong contribution of hydro. And now wind is starting. You see already in Sweden with 3%, but these figures are from 2012. In the last 2 years, also Brazil, the wind technology is going ahead. And I will show you now a few more pictures about the detailed composition of the different energy needs in Brazil and in Sweden. You see here the status of bioenergy in Brazil. These are government slides. Bioenergy is about 45%, 25%, and you see about 15% come from sugarcane and 9% from woody biomass, partly modern biomass for heat and partly traditional biomass. Other renewables are mainly wind, a bit solar, and what is not mentioned here in detail, in Brazil they also have a rather strong development of biogas for electricity and heat. And you can study in Brazil, they have a very consistent policy to develop all forms of biomass, biogas for heat and electricity, biomass for heat in the industry, and sugarcane for ethanol. Now we come to the next detail of Brazil, the next slide. You see in the electricity generation, biomass is not very important, only 7%, hydro is dominating, wind is just starting, but Brazil, for instance, is a country where it will be possible within maybe 5 or 10 years to really come to 100% renewable energy for electricity. And if you, the next slide now shows you a picture from the transport sector. In the transport sector, you see still diesel and gasoline are dominating, but altogether ethanol comes up for more or less 20% of the total consumption of transport fuels. And we'll see that in the future it probably will be easier to replace gasoline by ethanol than diesel by biodiesel, because globally the capacity to produce more ethanol is much bigger than the capacity to produce more biodiesel. And now we come to the other country. This is Sweden. Sweden just published a few months ago a graphic about the composition of the energy supply in Sweden in the year 2013. And here you see biomass covers 34%. And if we go in the different markets, heat, electricity, and transport fuels, we see the share of biomass for heat in Sweden is already 66%. And this is really leading in Europe. In Sweden, they almost completely transformed the heating sector from fossil fuels to renewables or to electricity. And the main instrument to reach this transformation of the heat system was the introduction of a carbon tax over 20 years ago. This carbon tax was increased every year, and it is now about 140 euro per ton of CO2 emissions. And this carbon tax more or less creates a guideline for all investors not to invest in fossil fuels, but to invest in renewables, with biomass or wind or hydropower. And this explains why Sweden reached such a high share of renewable energy now already and is going to continue it now. One of the main efforts in the Swedish government is to convert part of the transport sector to biofuels, not only ethanol and biodiesel, but also biogas or new forms of advanced biofuels based on woody biomass. And so we can say that Sweden is, so to say, one of the leading countries worldwide in the transformation of the energy system to renewables. The last point before I finish concerns the storage of energy. I mentioned already we can use especially biogas as storage within 24 hours. But if you look at the big differences in the demand for heat in the winter and the supply of solar energy in summer, you also need storages from summer to winter. And there are many technologies being discussed. The next one, but one important aspect I would like to make here is the biomass. The next slide, please. Biomass is stored solar energy. And if you, for instance, think today or now, what would you have to invest to store 1 kilowatt-hour energy? You see there are huge differences. If you store electricity in plant factories, you have to invest between 500 and 1,500 euro per kilowatt-hour. If you store energy as hot water in a hot water tank, you have to invest about 20 euro per kilowatt-hour. Certainly, there's a big difference between electricity and energy in hot water, but as you need more than 50% of your final energy as heat, in many cases it makes sense to store energy in form of heat and not of electricity. But by far the cheapest way to store energy from summer to winter is, for instance, to store it in pellets. Because if you only buy a storage place for pellets, the investment cost per kilowatt hour will only be 0.25 cents per kilowatt hour. With this, I only want to explain that you should include also biomass as stored solar energy in our discussions about how to store energy in the future from summer to winter. And if you need heat, biomass is an interesting option. I'm coming now to an end. My last picture, I would like to explain the huge challenge we have faced in changing the global energy system within the next 20 years. Because to comply with our climate targets, we should reduce the use of fossil fuels so that they only maybe cover 40% in 20 years. And this would mean we would have to increase solar wind strongly. You see the yellow slash is very small in 2011. It should be maybe 1/4 of the supply in 20 years. Biomass should also grow. And this would be a kind of milestone in the development towards a system with 100% renewable energy. In such a system, probably solar and wind would be much more important, and also biomass would grow. But we see, based on our potentials, we have enough potential, we have enough technology, we have developed technologies. It is really possible within a few decades to transform our energy systems completely to 100% renewables. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Heinz, for that interesting presentation. And I'm sure we will come back to you in the questions and answer session to answer some of the participants' questions. Great. Now we're moving on to our final speaker for today's webinar, and that is Tracy Lane. Thank you very much for joining us. Tracy leads the International Hydropower Association initiatives related to building and sharing knowledge in the areas of energy systems, climate change, risk and finance, regional cooperation, and water resource management. So over to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Joanna. Hello, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss hydropower's role in renewable energy systems. Just before I begin, I want to make sure that my screen is showing for everyone.
It is, yes.
Okay, great. So firstly, just a bit about the International Hydropower Association. We are a non-profit mutual association established to advance sustainable hydropower. We have 4 strategic objectives around which our work is focused, which is advancing policies and strategies for the hydropower sector, building a vibrant community, creating a platform for building and exchanging knowledge, and delivering value for members. Now, we saw this slide earlier, but I think it's worth showing again. At the end of 2014, renewable electricity accounted for 22.8% of total capacity in operation. And among the renewables family, hydropower is the leading renewable energy source for electricity generation globally, supplying 3/4 of all renewable electricity amid strong growth for all of the technologies. Hydropower can provide multiple energy and water services, including electricity generation for power, heat, and transport, and water storage for a variety of uses, including flood and drought protection, irrigation, water supply, navigation, and downstream flow regulation. There are 3 main types of hydropower: storage, run-of-river, and pumped storage hydropower. And in terms of operations, hydropower can supply baseload, peaking supply, or ancillary services, including energy storage. Now, Dave mentioned earlier when he was showing the duck curve graph that he mentioned the growing need for utility flexibility. On the energy side, hydropower is a very flexible technology. It can meet demands for more or less energy on the system very rapidly. It can provide energy storage, releasing stored water from the reservoir at times of high electricity demand along timescales ranging from seconds to days up to several months. This service from hydropower is likely to be called upon more frequently as more renewables are deployed, as there are few other commercially viable large-scale energy storage technology options available today. It is estimated now that approximately 98% of the world's electricity storage capacity is in the form of hydropower, much of which is pumped storage. And the way this works is at times of surplus energy production from other technologies, such as during high solar radiation or strong wind periods, that energy must either be used by the electricity system, stored for later use, or curtailed. In these cases, pumped storage hydropower can absorb that excess capacity from the grid to pump water into an upper reservoir, and in so doing, avoid that curtailment. That same stored renewable energy can then be used later when it's needed by the system, for example, when there is less solar radiation or wind on the system. In addition, hydropower also provides an array of other energy services or ancillary services, including black start capability, frequency regulation, inertial response, and spinning and non-spinning reserve and voltage support. And these services are increasingly important to the system as well in terms of maintaining flexibility and stability. Now, before we move into the case studies, I just want to show you an example of how hydropower works with the variable renewable technologies. This is an illustrative case of hydropower and wind showing a 3-week schematic of the electricity system. As I mentioned earlier, hydropower can provide baseload, peaking, and ancillary services. And in this case, the wind is supplying baseload and hydro is meeting the peaking needs. So with that increased penetration of variable renewables, there has been a shift from these daily predictable peaks to more unplanned peaks, and hydropower is able to rapidly respond to meet those peaks up and down on the system. And now let's take a look at our case studies. I have 3 case studies that I'll briefly present today. Firstly, El Hierro, which is a wind hydro remote island system. El Hierro is the smallest of the Canary Islands in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Africa, with an area of 278 kilometers squared and a population of less than 11,000. So it's a small system. The island was declared a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve in 2000. In 2014, the island of El Hierro commissioned the Corona del Viento power station, and with that, El Hierro is expected to be one of the world's first fully energy self-sufficient island systems, Prior to implementing this wind-hydro hybrid station, the island's annual diesel consumption was 40,000 barrels with emissions of over 18,000 tons of CO2, 100 tons of sulfur dioxide, and 400 tons of nitrogen oxides. So taking advantage of its strong natural resources, that is plenty of wind and sun and favorable geography for pump storage, El Hierro made a strategic decision to ditch diesel and move towards 100% renewables. It now has installed a wind power plant as its principal generator using 5 2.3 megawatt wind turbines for a total capacity of 11.5 megawatts. The wind is backed up by a pump storage hydropower system using an existing volcano as the upper reservoir and a purpose-built lower reservoir. In generation mode, the pump storage plant can supply 11.32 megawatts and it has a pumping capacity of 10 megawatts. There's also some solar thermal and PV capacity on the island with future plans to switch to electric vehicles and to install solar panels in buildings for heating purposes. On the screen you'll see a schematic of the system, which also includes a desalination plant. So this is a fully closed system here. It's not connected to any other grids as backup. The diesel, however, on the screen does remain as backup only, though. Since its installation or commissioning earlier this year, the system has operated on 100% renewables for periods, and it's expected to meet all of the island's requirements this year and into next year. Moving on to our next case study, we have a hydro-solar hybrid station. China's Longyangsha hydropower station on the Yellow River was put into operation back in 1992 and provides an important role in peak load regulation and frequency control in the northwestern part of the country. It is equipped with 4 320 megawatt turbines, so a total of 1,280 megawatts of hydropower. In 2014, the Gonghe PV Industrial Park was commissioned. This covers an area of 9 kilometers squared and has an installed capacity of 320 megawatts, which is the equivalent of one of the hydropower turbines. The PV park is connected by a 330 kilovolt transmission line to a standby turbine unit at the Longyangsha hydro station. As you can see here from the middle set of graphics on the screen, when there are conditions of cloud cover or rain, the power output of the PV power plant rapidly declines. And in this case, because the PV plant is linked directly to the hydropower station, that hydropower station can instantaneously increase power output to fill the gap caused by the fluctuation of the PV output. So this quick response capacity helps to smooth the output curve of the PV station before dispatching out to the grid. This is one of the largest PV plants in the world, as well as the largest PV hydro project to date, and construction is currently underway to increase the capacity of the solar station. So that's proof, not just the building of the system, but it's being expanded to continue its role, or rather expand its role. Now let's look at the case of Iceland, which operates on 100% renewable at a national scale. In 2014, Iceland's system, its generation was 71% hydropower and 28.9% geothermal. Thermal sources are reserved for remote islands and are not connected to the grid. Iceland's space heating system is also 99% renewable, and transportation is the final frontier, so to speak, with plans for the country to transition fully away from fossil fuel sources for transport by around 2050. The first hydropower plant was commissioned in Iceland back in 1904, and the country's been developing hydropower ever since, with the most recent project, the Buderhals project, a 95 megawatt hydropower plant was completed in 2014, bringing Iceland's total hydropower capacity to 1,986 megawatts. Installed geothermal capacity is 665 megawatts, and in 2013 Iceland became the 100th country in the world to install wind, with currently has 3.2 megawatts of capacity. So the chart here that you see on the screen is hydropower generation layered onto the same chart with geothermal, and you can see the combined growth of the two over the past decades. Hydropower is the darker blue on the bottom, with geothermal as the lighter blue shade. In this system, geothermal supplies base load and hydropower supplies base and peak load power. And the country is continuing to develop both geothermal and hydro, with a 90 megawatt geothermal project currently under construction and a 100 megawatt hydropower expansion project currently under construction. And Iceland has plans to export this clean energy as well via a proposed 1,000 kilometer direct submarine cable link to the UK. Now, Iceland was not always 100% renewable. It made a strategic decision to transition from imported fossil fuels to domestic renewable energy sources about 50 years ago. And not only has Iceland been able to transform its electricity system, it has done so while at the same time attracting power-intensive industry to use its low-cost system. So the domestic market in Iceland consumes only 18% of the electricity, and the remainder is used to power economic growth, including powering things like heavy industry, such as aluminum smelters, data centers, agriculture, and fish processing. So this demonstrates that 100% renewable electricity is not just for smaller or isolated systems, but it can also provide a sufficient and reliable electricity supply for industry and for economic growth. And power-intensive industries can rely on renewables, and in fact are increasingly seeking out renewables, as we're seeing in more and more cases. In closing, as we all know, there's a big push towards renewables and away from fossil fuels, but at the same time there is some skepticism about how far renewables can go. But I think the examples you've seen today, and more like them that are being developed each year, demonstrate that 100% renewable systems are possible, and when the renewable technologies are developed together at a system level, they can provide reliable, clean, and affordable power for economic access, or energy access rather, and economic growth together. So if you'd like any further information related to hydropower or renewables working together, please do feel free to get in touch. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Tracy, for that excellent presentation. And with that, I'd like to open up the questions and answers session, and we will read out some of the questions that you've been typing in. So I'll ask all the expert panelists to please unmute their microphones and to jump in and answer any of these questions. So the first one I think would probably be for you, Marietta, and Dave has already started typing an answer. It's about the geothermal solar hybrids, and if this could be a solution to solar intermittency and provide baseload power. So if you could provide a comment for that question.
Yeah, this is Marietta speaking from the International Geothermal Association. Yeah, I showed one case study where geothermal and solar are working very well. I showed two actually, one in the Drakeland community with solar thermal and another one in Nevada. And there geothermal and solar are working very nicely together. And I actually know another project in El Salvador where solar is also working together with geothermal. So I think it's a very good combination because geothermal as a baseload energy provider fits in well with solar PV, especially in countries where it's very hot and where solar radiation tends to accumulate during the day. So I think these two technologies work very nicely together in Latin America.
Great, thank you.
Dave, maybe you want to add to this?
Dave, if you'd unmute. Yeah, great.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good answer. I think obviously we've talked about utility flexibility, and I think to the extent that geothermal can serve as a flexible resource so that it can be made available when an intermittent or a down ramp occurs with solar, will certainly make it an effective, viable technology to go along with solar, because that's really the key there is if you want to have a steady supply of baseload power, is to have the two systems that are providing that power be able to work in conjunction with each other so that the power output is smooth.
Great. Now I have another question which is directed to Stefan Sänger, but I think it applies to all of these technologies, and it's about policy as a barrier. And how is policy, because Stefan, you mentioned in your presentation that policy was a barrier to some of the projects involved, and the question is, are you not allowed to build some of these systems, or do the communities not want it?
Yeah, no, I've already sent an answer in writing here, but it's not so much whether the community doesn't want it. I mean, the communities are the main beneficiaries of these projects. It is more, it's manifold barriers. It starts with importing technologies. This is certainly at least the equipment that is certainly at least initially something which needs to be done. There is, it's not clear. Sometimes there are exemptions from taxes. Then, of course, building permits, and then a problem is that often there are licenses needed, different types of licenses. I've been told one really concrete problem is that there is no liberalized market. We would need a license maybe as a generator of energy, and then there is also strictly regulated prices per kilowatt hour, which also people might be able to pay a bit more in a local area, but instead of not having electricity would pay a bit more than what's regulated. It's not possible to charge a bit more. So these are such kind of barriers, and then of course we know from many countries all over the world that the different authorities which are responsible for issuing the different type of licenses are not coordinating well. So it's every kind of support is missing. A very big problem, of course, is still that most countries do see strong subsidies for fossil fuels, which are distorting the market, and this is a very big problem.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you very much, Stefan, for that answer. I have more of a technical question here coming in for Tracy, and it's about the water being pumped up to the upper reservoir, and if that's with salt water, is it water from the ocean? And if so, how are the turbines protected against the salt water?
In the particular case of El Hierro, it's not salt water that's pumped between the reservoirs, but there is technology available to use pumped storage, to allow salt water for pumped storage. It's specialized technology, though I don't know the details of how the turbines are protected, but there is definitely capacity for that, and as well you might want to consider as well that there's offshore ocean technologies, which of course is salt water, so there's definitely the capability for turbines to run in a saltwater environment.
Okay, thank you. And here is a question for all our expert panelists, and it's about the future of renewable energy technologies, and how do you think the reduction in oil prices plays a role in the future of renewable technologies? And that question has come up again and again in our webinars about what are the main obstacles, because we're seeing every time a webinar happens that the technology is there and there's all these great different projects happening. So what do you think the main challenges are, and a reduction in oil prices and how that plays a role? Anybody want to take a stab at that question?
I could at least start with an answer, but I'd like the other panelists to weigh in. I think a lot of the impact of the low oil prices on renewable energy is psychological. I think, for example, most of our electricity supply around the world is not coming from oil. It's coming from other fossil sources, mainly coal and natural gas, although the prices of those technologies are also impacted to some extent by low oil prices. But in the long run, if you look at if you take a longer term view of this, these low prices are not sustainable, I don't think. And I think that we should not ever use low oil prices as a short-term rationale for slowing down our renewable energy development, because I think we really have to take a look at the bigger, longer-term picture as to how ultimately these oil supplies are going to become depleted, and the reserves are going to be more and more expensive to extract. And plus the obvious climate implications of investing in fossil fuels, which locks us into high carbon emissions for the future, something we have to reverse here now. We can't wait any longer for that.
Hello. I may add to that.
Joanna, can I speak a few words?
Yes, yes.
Okay, concerning the low oil price and the bioenergy sector, I would say some sectors of the bioenergy industry are very strongly affected by this low oil price, especially the transformation of the heat market. We see it in parts of the world, for instance in Europe, that over the last 12 months, new investment in renewable heating based on biomass dropped by 50–60% because oil is that cheap right now. And so some of our industry has also big problems because of the decline of sales of biomass equipment. There's also a similar problem in the biofuel industry, which really competes with fossil fuels on the transport market. Also here the profits are going down and some of the companies have real problems. So we advocate very strongly now on the biomass sector. This would be the best time now to introduce carbon taxes, like in Sweden, for instance, to offset part of these very low oil prices and to use this money to decline other taxes and to change the tax system to a more ecological setup. And if this is not done, and if the low oil prices will go on, this really will be a big problem for parts of the bioenergy industry in the next years.
Joanna, if I may add
Yes.
to this as well. Yeah, Stefan Xenger speaking here from Berlin Energy Association. There was an interesting discussion about this topic during the World Future Energy Summit in January in Abu Dhabi. It's an interesting place for this discussion because everybody knows that Abu Dhabi is one of the richest places, most or wealthiest places because of the oil income. So it was a very serious discussion. I got some new kind of views on this, and one is that it seems that the currently low oil price is, of course, a little bit also, some people may call it manipulation and politics behind it, because there are some countries which are benefiting from others suffering from the low oil price. Russia is not happy, and Venezuela is not happy about the low oil price. But I would see that this low oil price at the moment is already a result of the success of renewables. And I would see that in the midterm future, for sure, renewables will set the benchmark for the oil price, because renewables are now that cheap. I mean, they are cheaper than oil or in that range that they put the oil price under pressure, and nobody can afford to offer the energy from oil at a higher price than renewables, which means as a result, the kind of good news, if it works like what I hope and I'm confident that it will work, that the price of renewable or the cost of renewable technologies will determine the maximum amount of oil and gas that will still be extracted. Because some of the fracking activities now in North America or the tar sands in Canada, they just don't pay back anymore because it will get too expensive, because we have now the alternatives, which now are also entering the transportation sector. Electric cars are getting more and more common. I have now a plug-in hybrid car, so for me it's very easy. Whenever I can, electricity is much cheaper, although my electricity is highly taxed, and of course I get my power from renewables. But this is the new kind of impact that renewables have. So we should see the low oil price rather as something that shows how strong renewables are oriented.
But Stefan,
Tracy.
okay.
So I just would like to add, I do think that lower oil prices probably have had some impact on renewable energy, but the price of oil and the price of electricity is not the only reason to, it's not the only decision point with regards to what technology you choose and what kind of energy system you want to have. There are energy security considerations, desire for clean energy, there's consideration of exchange rate risk or risk for future carbon pricing situations, a desire to avoid the point source pollution from fossil fuel-based technology. So even though there are currently lower oil prices, it doesn't mean that that's the only decision point to factor in. And as well, I think someone maybe already said it, but even with current low prices, it doesn't mean there'll always be low prices. There's certainly a history of volatility in that market. So
I would like to add one word to Stefan. I completely follow you concerning those renewables without feedstock cost, like wind or photovoltaics or hydropower or geothermal. But in the case of biomass, it's different. You know, we have also feedstock cost. And on the other hand, biomass is the main renewable energy source for the heating sector. And as you know, in Europe or also worldwide, we have about 80%, 85% of fossil fuels in the heating sector. And the transformation of the heating market really slows down if you have low oil prices. And if the oil prices keep that low in the next years, fossil fuels will continue to dominate the heating sector, and the total transformation of the system will be very slow, too slow to reduce CO2 emissions fast enough. Therefore, we really advocate strongly now countries, OECD countries, should introduce carbon taxes to offset the low oil prices and to further push the development of renewables also in the heating sector.
Thank you very much. Any last comments?
Well, I would certainly not contradict to that. If I can just briefly answer to this. I mean, there is still, and I didn't say that the oil price is only a result of the renewables. So I think that it is very clearly, it's one part of that. And we need to switch to renewables also for climate change reasons, also for other reasons, as fast as possible. So everything that speeds up that process will help to save our planet more safely. So that's of course very clear. But I just wanted to bring this global picture also into the, long-term development that I see.
Thank you very much. Great. Well, those were very, very strong words, and I think we could all have a webinar on that topic in itself. There's a lot to discuss, and it's a very, very important thing to discuss. But for now, I'd like to, we're out of time, unfortunately, for the webinar, and I'm going to say thank you very much to our expert panelist speakers. So we had Dr. David Rene from the International Solar Energy Society, Stefan Zenger from the World Wind Energy Association, Marietta Zander from the International Geothermal Association, Heinz Koppetz from the International Bioenergy Association, and Tracy Lane from the International Hydropower Association. Thank you very much to all 5 of you for joining this webinar and sharing your knowledge and your time for this international audience. And of course, last but not least, thank you to our audience for joining us today from all around the world. And we look forward to welcoming you at the next ISIS webinar or event. Last minute reminder that today is actually the very last day to register online for the ISIS Solar World Congress. So register today online at the Solar World Congress website, swc2015.org. It takes place in Daegu in Korea in the 8th to the 12th of November. Well, that is all we have time for today. I apologize if we did not get to your questions. We will try to send the questions to the panelists who will answer them, and we will post it all into the ISIS members area. So keep checking the members area to see if the questions have been answered. The recording will be posted on the website and will be available for the next 24 hours, and then also go to the members area. Great. In that case, without further ado, I wish you all a lovely start to your day or afternoon or evening, whatever time it is in your part of the world. Thank you for joining us, and see you at the next webinar.